The scripture reading for today comes to us from the book of Proverbs, chapter 6, and I shall read verses 20 and 21. My son, keep your father's commandments, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. Bind them upon your heart forever. Fasten them around your neck. A 6-year-old boy somehow got separated from his mother in a supermarket. Frantically, he started crying, "Martha, Martha!" That was his mother's name. And the mother, when she heard her son screaming, she came to him running and said, "You shouldn't call me Martha. I'm your mother." And the boy answered, "I know, but this store is full of mothers. This world in which we live is full of mothers. But each one of us has only one mother who is very special. There's no one like our mother, and no one can take her place." In our responsive reading, we read about the ideal mother and the ideal wife. In Proverbs chapter 31, verse 26, it says that the ideal mother speaks with wisdom, and faithful instruction is on her tongue. The Hebrew original says, she speaks with wisdom, and judicious counsel is on her tongue. In other words, whenever a wise mother speaks, she gives wise, very wise advice. When John Wesley was a student at Oxford University in London, he was shocked by the amount of drinking done by the students. After writing to his mother, he received from her the following wise counsel. She said, "My dear son, remember that anything that increases the authority of the body over the mind is evil and harmful and should be shunned." What a wise mother she was, and what a judicious counsel she gave. Remember, whatever increases the authority of the body over the mind is an evil thing and should be shunned. When a London editor submitted to Sir Winston Churchill a list that contained the names of all those who had been his teachers and asked for his approval, Churchill sent the list back to the editor with the following comment: "You have omitted the name of the greatest of my teachers, my mother." About a century ago, in England, there was a preacher called George Campbell Morgan, who had 4 sons, and all of them became ministers of the gospel. At a family reunion, a guest asked one of the sons, "Which Morgan is the greatest preacher?" And the son replied without any hesitation, "My mother." When Thomas Edison, the great inventor, was in the 4th grade, his teacher sent him home with the following note: "Your child is stupid, and we can do nothing for him." His mother, Mrs. Edison, replied to the teacher, "You don't understand my son. I will teach him myself." And she did. And the result was marvelous. Thomas Edison grew up to become a great scientist and a great inventor. You remember, he invented the electric light bulb. History shows that all great leaders had mothers who were willing to sacrifice their personal comfort in order to enhance the future success of their children. Being a mother is not a walk in the park. It's not easy to be a mother. By the time a child grows up to be 18 years old, a mother will have handled 18,000 hours of extra work. Women who never have children have 3 extra months per year of leisure time. Motherhood means sacrifice. A father was trying to explain the concept of marriage to his 8-year-old daughter. He pulled out his wedding album thinking that visual images might help. After explaining to her the entire wedding service, he asked if she had any questions. And the girl pointed to a picture of the wedding party and said, "Daddy, is that when Mommy came to work for us?" Yeah, mothers carry heavy burdens on their shoulders, and they work hard every day. No nation is greater than its mothers, for they are the ones who mold and shape the character of the next generation. I recently came across a true story that happened during the Holocaust. Solomon Rosenberg and all the members of his family were arrested, and they were placed in a Nazi concentration camp. The rules were very simple. As long as the prisoners were able to work, they were permitted to live. And when they became too weak to work, they were exterminated. Solomon Rosenberg watched as his father and mother were marched off to the death chambers. And he knew that his youngest son David would be next because he had always been a frail child. Every evening when Solomon Rosenberg returned to the barracks after long hours of hard labor, he searched for his family. And whenever he discovered the members of his family, they huddled together, he embraced them and thanked God for another day of staying alive. One day when Mr. Rosenberg returned from his work, he noticed that his eldest son Joshua was sobbing. And he asked him why. And the son said, "David was too weak today and he couldn't do the work assigned to him, so the guards came and took him away. He was so afraid and kept crying. And Mom took his hand and went with him to the death chamber." Here's a mother who was willing to sacrifice her life for the sake of her son. On December 7, 1988, a strong earthquake devastated northwestern Armenia. I remember these 2 dates. December 7 hasn't been a good date for the Armenians and hasn't been a good date for the Americans. It was on December 7 that the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, and it was on December 7, 1988 that a devastating earthquake flattened northwestern Armenia. In the city of Gyumri, Susanna Petrosyan lived with her 6-year-old daughter, Gayane, on the 5th floor of a 9-story apartment building. When the earthquake hit, with a magnitude that was over 7 degrees, the floor of the Petrosyan family apartment caved in, and they were tumbled into the basement of the building. By chance, Mrs. Petrosyan found a jar of blackberry jam, which provided nourishment for her and for her daughter for 3 days. After remaining 10 days under the rubble, Mrs. Petrosyan noticed that her daughter was getting weaker and weaker, and she realized that her daughter would not be able to survive unless she took some drastic action. So this unselfish mother took a piece of broken glass and cut her wrist and told her daughter to suck and lick the blood. The mother bled to death to let her daughter live. Eventually, the young daughter, Gayane, was found alive, reclining next to her dead mother. Here was another mother who was willing to sacrifice her life for the sake of her daughter. James Dobson, who is the founder of Focus on the Family radio program, tells of a time that he came home when his son Ryan was a small baby. It had been a terrible day for his wife Shirley because Ryan had been sick and had cried all day long. As she was changing the diapers of her son, the telephone rang, and she reached over to answer it. Just then, her son had an attack of diarrhea. She cleaned up the mess that her son had created, bathed him, and put him in clean clothes. Then she carried him into the living room where she fed him. And as she was burping him, he threw up all over himself, all over his mother, and all over the couch. Mr. Dobson says that when he entered his home that day, he could smell the aroma of motherhood in every place. And his frustrated wife cried out, "Was all this in my contract?" Yes, motherhood is a tough job because it involves pain, suffering, and sacrifice. A mother's love is the closest example we have to God's unconditional love for us. to comprehend God's love for us, we have to look at the love that our mothers have had for us. As I said earlier, Proverbs chapter 31 has the description of the ideal mother and the ideal wife. Let me go over some of the characteristics that the Bible mentions. In verse 13, we're told that the mother, the ideal mother, sews clothes for her family. In verse 14, we're told she brings food from far away. In other words, she does the shopping. In verse 15, we're told that she rises up while it is still dark to prepare meals for her family. In verse 16, we're told that she